Hello, and welcome to Asian America, the leading public television show about Asia and Asian Americans. For this special show, I am your host, Alexandra Toma. I am the Executive Director of the Connect US Fund, and more importantly for this show, I am also the co-chair of the Fissile Materials Working Group, which is a global coalition of over 60 organizations and experts focused on nuclear security and providing real solutions to the threat of nuclear terrorism. Today, I am joined by my colleagues, Ms. Corey Hinterstein and Mr. Ken Luongo. They are experts in their own right in nuclear security and will be discussing the upcoming 2012 Seoul Nuclear Security Summit and the importance of nuclear security. Ken Luongo is also the president of the Partnership for Global Security. He is going to be speaking at the Seoul Experts Symposium preceding the Nuclear Security Summit. And Corey Hinterstein is the Vice President of International Programs at the Nuclear Threat Initiative, NTI, which recently released an NTI index following nuclear security issues. All three of us will be at the Seoul Summit and look forward to discussing these important issues. But before we do, let's take a look at a short video about the Seoul Security Summit. So let's start with you, Ken. Can you tell us a little bit about nuclear terrorism? Is nuclear terrorism a real threat?
Yes, nuclear terrorism is a real threat. It's something that international organizations like the United Nations and the International Atomic Energy Agency, as well as a number of governments from around the world, have indicated is one of the top threats to international security. The challenge is to convince people that you can take the material and make a bomb out of it. And the experts have indicated that it's entirely possible, and it's something that we need to worry about. It's a low probability event, but it's a high consequence event, and it's something very serious. That's why the summit is very important.
And Corey, are there any examples you can give us about some of the risks and threats that we've seen around nuclear security?
There have been a number of incidents of nuclear smuggling where nuclear material, highly enriched uranium or plutonium, the key ingredient for a nuclear weapon, have been found on the black market, including most recently in the fall of 2011, where highly enriched uranium was captured and at least one of the perpetrators who was trying to sell that material was never found and is believed to still have some highly enriched uranium, although not enough to make a nuclear weapon by itself. The scariest thing is that highly enriched uranium and plutonium, most of it, when it has been caught and been identified by the International Atomic Energy Agency and other international organizations, the institutes where this material came from never even knew it was missing. So we don't even know how big the problem is, how much material may be out there, but we know that the easiest way to prevent nuclear terrorism is to secure material where it exists. It's much harder to find it after it's gone.
You mentioned that these incidents have happened across the world, but a lot of people, when they hear about terrorism, they think, well, oh, that's an American problem, that's an American issue. So Ken, can you tell us a little bit about your views on that?
Yeah, I think the biggest misconception is that the nuclear weapon states which have the largest amount of this material are somehow the largest targets. In fact, facilities that have even small amounts of, say, highly enriched uranium for civilian purposes, not for military purposes, that are unsecured are actually a bigger threat because it doesn't take that much material to make the weapon in an improvised form, and it also is places where security is less rigorous are at civilian locations rather than military reservations. So, it's not a problem just for the weapon states. It's a problem for all nations that have this material. But secondarily, it's quite important because if there's a terrorist event, there's going to be an economic impact, and it's going to be especially devastating to developing countries and countries that are export dependent.
Corey, can you tell us a little bit more about the civilian side of where these materials lie, and why is that more of a potentially more of a risk than the military side?
Well, we know that highly enriched uranium and plutonium, the key ingredients for weapons, are found in weapons and in those 9 states that have nuclear weapons. But these materials are also found in more than 24 other countries. And in those cases, they are used in civilian nuclear power programs. They are used in nuclear research. They are used to produce medical isotopes, the kind of materials that really help and benefit mankind. Unfortunately, we historically had spread this material around for these civilian purposes without thinking of the potential terrorist consequences. One of the benefits of the current debate, and one of the areas where the Nuclear Security Summit is really making a contribution, is in getting states to recognize that they don't need these materials anymore, to get rid of the materials, but not to lose the opportunity of gaining the peaceful benefits of these materials. So it's important to identify other material like low enriched uranium, which is a much lower threat. In fact, I would say poses almost no threat at all, and making sure that those materials are the ones used for medical, agricultural, and other uses.
Got it. So let's talk about the Nuclear Security Summit a little bit. You both mentioned it and talked about the importance of the Nuclear Security Summit. So what is the Nuclear Security Summit?
The Nuclear Security Summit in Seoul is the second version of this new summit that was announced by President Obama in his speech at Prague in 2009. And so the president said that he was going to launch an initiative around the world to secure all vulnerable nuclear materials in 4 years. And so the summit was the first step in Washington, was the first step toward that goal. And at that summit, it was decided that there would be a second summit in Seoul. And now in advance of the Seoul summit, it's been announced that there'll be a third summit in the Netherlands. So we have a process of events where national leaders are coming together to talk about two basic things. One, the importance of preventing nuclear terrorism, top priority. And then secondly, how do we improve the security of these materials so that terrorists can never get access to them, so that we don't have to deal with the consequences of a terrorist activity. So that's what these are about. They're high-level meetings of political leaders from over 50 countries. I think in Seoul there's 53 different national leaders that are coming. And the idea is to build a global consensus against nuclear terrorism and then as strong a barrier as possible against it.
And Corey, can you tell us a little bit about what happened at the 2010 Nuclear Security Summit in Washington?
Well, the 2010 Washington Summit really was historic. It was the first time that leaders came together to talk about the issue of nuclear security and the prevention of nuclear terrorism. There are a lot of other treaties and venues to discuss other areas of nuclear threat, whether it be the proliferation of nuclear weapons, nuclear safety, or other issues related to the nuclear arena. But nuclear security had never had such a focus. So these leaders, 47 countries and 3 international organizations, came together, and they had really 3 sets of products out of the summit. The first was a communique. This was a high-level political commitment recognizing the reality of the nuclear terrorist threat, which we have to remember, Ken described that threat. But until the 2010 Nuclear Security Summit, there really hadn't been as wide a consensus that the threat was real, or even that a nuclear terrorist event was possible. So that was the important first step. There was also a work plan that listed many different things that states could do to help improve their own nuclear security approaches. And again, as Ken said, all states have a stake in this, not just in the consequence, but in preventing it. Even if they are not the state in which nuclear material is located, they might be the state where material is transported through, or the state where a terrorist organization might use the nuclear material to put together a device. So all states are important in this chain. And then the third was a set of what were called house gifts. And these house gifts were what each country brought to Washington and made a commitment to do. So some of them were related to support for the International Atomic Energy Agency, or signing a treaty such as the Convention on Physical Protection of Nuclear Materials or the Nuclear Terrorism Convention, or in some cases, Ukraine, Chile. These were states that made a commitment to or announced that they had given up all of the nuclear material that was on their territory. So there were real gains, but the biggest progress was simply coming together, agreeing on the threat, and having some sort of a forward program.